Getting it real with RealChunWai on the hottest topics, frank, engaging and candid. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. The next general election is just around the corner. How will PKR face the elections in a crowded field? Joining us tonight is the PKR Vice President and the MP for Setiawangsa, Nik Nazmi, Nik Ahmad. Good evening, Malaysia and followers from around the world. Thank you for joining us again tonight. Our guest for this evening is YB Nik Nazmi, Nik Ahmad, who is the MP for Setiawangsa in Kuala Lumpur. He's also a Vice President of PKR, and he was elected as a Selangor State Assemblyman at the age of 26, the youngest candidate to win the 2008 elections. He was re-elected to the State Assembly in 2013 and was appointed to the Selangor Exco, overseeing the education, human capital, and science portfolio. So he's a very experienced man politically, although that he is very young and that he's gearing up again for the coming GE15, raring to go. We are pleased that he has found time for us this evening, despite the hectic schedule at the Parliament. Now, YB, we shall go straight to the conversation, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
All right. So I'm holding this book, his latest book, which is called The Malaysian Sun. Maybe YB, for those of Malaysians who are not familiar with your new release, in your foreword, you stated that you began writing this book in April 2021. Now, tell us briefly about this book and the journey that to put this writing into a book.
Thank you, Dato' Sri. Well, that time when I was writing it, we were in the midst of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. And like I think many of us, I was struggling to be sane other than going to my kawasan, spending time on Netflix, reading a bit. So I thought that, it's good for me to put down my thoughts about my life, considering that I reflected last year, more than half of my life was spent in politics. Although it was, as you said, relatively young. So it's basically a mid-career memoir, hopefully. It's not saying that I'm going to retire soon. And I think, we've gone through a lot. I mean, me personally, but then when we reflect about what the country has gone through since I started being involved just after Reformasi, all the way to 2021, the country has gone through a lot of things, and it's useful to reflect on that.
Yeah, I actually like this book. It's a really a page turner. In fact, that when I write my memoir, I'm going to model after this. I like those. I like those parts where the passing phases of this country, the milestones of this country, where you had gone through, and that all of us, both of us, gone through in different decades. But especially I like this part where you talk about the music when you were first introduced to. So when I read that part, I was thinking of my 80s time during the disco era. Okay, so it will be part of my book. It's really nice because that most politicians will talk about everything politically, without putting into words the atmosphere and then the motive aspect of what it was like for other Malaysians in that era. And right. Every era and every decade is always different. Now, why did you call it the Malaysian journey? The Malaysian Sun, sorry, the Malaysian Sun.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a very colorful, I think, life. My parents are from Kelantan, and like many Kelantanese, they migrated in the 60s. I was born and bred here. I went to a Catholic school, which at that time was still very mixed. We had a big cross at the school. At the bottom, it was written in Jawi, SK Lasal, PJ. Yeah. And then I went to the Malay College, which is all Malay, but you get, the Bangsa boys, and you get the boys from Terengganu and the Felda settlements. I went to the UK, and I joined politics, right? And a multiracial party at that. So I wouldn't say obviously my life is totally representative, but I think I've touched on quite the whole, a lot of the points that you would say are Malaysian.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Malaysia is all about, right? That
Mm-hmm.
it's we tend to always talk about our circle or our bubble,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we forget that Malaysia is very diverse, and it goes both ways. Whether you have conservatives wanting to ban concerts, and if you read in my book, I went through a
Mm.
phase of banning
Yes.
concerts, and then
Yes.
you have liberals looking down at people from Kelantan, Terengganu, or Sabah and Sarawak. So
Mm.
so I think if you appreciate that diversity, then I think you can understand Malaysia better, and
Yeah.
then then only you can start a conversation
Right.
between one
Yes.
another.
Yeah. And it was a quite surprise for me when I read about your passing phases as a teenager, when you had reservations as a Muslim about music and whether you should be wearing shorts. All of us would go through certain phases, political phases in our lives as the young person. As a young person growing up, I thought that I will probably move towards socialism. Like fighting for the proletariat, the peasant and the workers. And then it dawned on me much later that there were not much peasants and workers.
I went
But
through that phase, yeah.
yeah, you as they say that if you are a young person and you don't have this passion and a heart, okay, then you shouldn't be in politics, right? You're
Yeah.
supposed to fight for the lower classes in different forms.
Yeah.
My experience of the because I come from Penang, and Penang been very multiracial and also predominantly Chinese. So I went to study in UKM. It was the first time that I went to the canteen and they told me that I should be wearing long pants and not short pants. So it was the first time that I realized that menutup aurat was not just for the ladies, it was just for the men as well. So it was a learning process. I took it very cool. You're in a different situation, you're in a different atmosphere, so you tend to adjust accordingly. It's not a problem. Now, I mentioned I suppose it's the Freudian sleep. Okay, I mentioned the Malaysian journey. I think it was written by Raymond Rashid, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I mean that growing up in MCKK, I didn't realize that you met what they call it, Rafizi there, and of course in London as well. And you mentioned in your book, in your forward, that it was Rafizi who was instrumental, in your words, dragging you into politics. Okay, tell us about that relationship.
Yeah, well, actually, I didn't literally meet him in Malaysia. But when I entered MCKK, it was the year after he left.
I see. Okay, right.
But he won basically all the awards in school, including the Best Student Award, which he got from Datuk Sri Anwar at that time. So we all knew his name because his face was everywhere.
Okay.
And I did this was the start of the website, and I was one of the geeks who actually did a website for the school. And he actually read my profile, and I was active in the Islamic Society, in debate, the student union, so on and so forth. So he came up with this very cheesy pickup line and said, "Oh, you remind me of myself." That was his
Yes.
email. So I can still remember that email that he sent me. And obviously, being a young, impressionable kid, you got this email from a very well-known student, at least in our circles. It meant a lot. And he groomed me or nurtured me very, very, not in a condescending or authoritarian way, but more in a sort of very soft way. And eventually, I mean, he found out about my politics, so I was already critical of the government. Then maybe if I didn't meet Rafizi, I would have joined PAS. So
Thank God.
Then he got me to meet up with the young professionals and students who were helping out the party. So I went to Datuk Sri Anwar's Bukit Damansara house. I met Nurul Izzah, I met Yusmadi, and a few other people. So that was that relationship. And when I went to the UK, it was Rafizi who picked me up, and
he greeted you and wait for you at Heathrow Airport.
Yes, and it was his birthday, right? So he'll always remind me every year about that. But I think he has a thing about sort of spotting young talents and then bringing them into whether it's politics or activism or even helping out the debate team in school. So he had that eye for talent, and I was fortunate to be spotted by him.
Okay, now this is part in your book where you mentioned that you're very heavily involved in politics, student activism. You were organizing events and talks for visiting Malaysian politicians, and you were also involved in some student protests here in London. And of course, it got your parents worried, and it also got your sponsors a bit concerned over your kind of protest, including one at the Tourism Malaysia office outside there. Okay, no, and you, I think it was the second degree, then when you had your law degree, when you were under PNB, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and of course, when you came back, you were again seen in activism, and your PNB sponsors were not too happy and had to give you a pep talk. Now, there was one part was really interesting where you mentioned that in all these things as a student, as a scholarship holder, there was also always this Biro Tata Negara, sort of like putting stuff into your mind. But you didn't expand too much. Now I wanted to expand too much because I've never had this experience of going through a Biro Tata Negara course. You had reservation or some happiness over that. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I heard about it a lot, and I mean, from what I understand, it was the government's way back when I think Tun Dr. Mahathir was education minister of countering the student movement. That was the genesis of it. But eventually, it became very partisan, very political. And by the time I went in, that was during my second year of my law degree, and I went to the Biro Tata Negara. It was an all Malay student group at that time. Basically, the major arguments or simplistic arguments were, Islam, PAS is basically Parti Ajaran Sesat, DAP, Chinese chauvinist or pseudo communist party, and PKR, either wayward liberals being funded by the West or something like that, right? And so they were drumming it, and it was not subtle, to say the least. And we even had to do a quiz where, so we know it was so obvious, right? So they say, just answer. So, okay, hadir ke ceramah pembangkang, adakah anda patut A, tak patut B, So it was something out of what do you call that, dystopian novel, and we lived it. So that was my experience. I even had to give a sermon, but the text was already written. Either ISA halal dari segi Islam or Malaysia sebuah negara Islam. And most of the students, I mean, they were not pro-opposition, but they also were not so stupid, right? Yeah. So they were not excited about it, but we some things we had to go through. But I think the worst was I've heard that there were groups where the students were not entirely Malay or entirely Muslim. And the trainers somehow rather missed that fact. And the things that they said were really racist or religiously what do you call that, discriminatory, and it obviously didn't go down too well. And so what happened was that when we came to power in Selangor, we made it into a point that to stop the civil servants in Selangor from going to BTN, and we all shared these stories, and eventually it grabbed the attention where even Tun Mahathir defended it, and I think Nazri Aziz and even Datuk Sri Najib spoke about closing it down, and we finally managed to do it when we won in 2018.
No, you know that in most cases, especially for government scholarship holders, they will probably say that, look, I've got this government scholarship, and the next line will be I will join the PTD to be a government officer, pegawai takbir dan diplomatic, and then the next line could possibly be I'll join UMNO, and my path will be drawn up there, and that you decided to go the other way. Okay, were there any concerns among your family members who says that, look, why did you choose to join PKR? No, why not UMNO, Demi Bangsa dan Negara? And then everybody's happy. Is the hunky dory. Why PKR? Why did you choose the different way?
I was very fortunate because my family was very supportive. My father was actually PTD. He was KSU, in fact. And he was at one time nearly roped in to join PAS. He did not, but he had obvious sympathies for the opposition. And so I think that sort of rubbed, on me as his son and in our conversations. And by the time, and my mother got hooked into reformasi. Many of my family members were, some weren't, some were UMNO and all that, as usual, that color.
Sure.
But it was difficult to convince students to come to our events. I remember that when I was active in the UK and trying to get people to attend opposition events. For me personally, I always felt that was my calling. And as I said, I got into trouble as a student. I got into trouble as an executive in PNB. I knew that, this was a relationship that for not just for my sake, but probably for my bosses in PNB, they'll probably be happier if I was out of it. So, the moment I got back to Malaysia, I was involved at the grassroots level of the party. And when a year later, Anwar asked me to join, it wasn't that difficult of a decision. Obviously, my parents, as any parents, they were worried about the financial element, about the risk and all that. But for me, it was just too big of a chance to miss out, because I said it's one of the what ifs that if I did not take it, then I would regret for the rest of my life. And I was young. I was foolish, probably. You can say that, right? I did not have a mortgage of a house. I did not have many other commitments. So it was easy for me to make that decision. If now you ask me to make that decision, it won't be that straightforward.
You were always the guy who always wants to do and go the other way. So the rest of your friends were supporting the Manchester United, and you decided to support Liverpool. I must say, like Rafi said, I'm going to say that you reminded yourself of reminded me of yourself, okay? Because when I was in university, all the other guys were doing the same thing. They were all supporting Manchester United, and decided that I'm not going to follow them. I decided to support Arsenal. Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And look at it. Your book says that your father was responsible in many ways in implementing and carrying out the position and the decision of Tun Abdul Razak in the new economy policy. You are a product. You benefited from the NEP. But in your book, you also mentioned your reservation of how things had gone wrong. Tell us a bit of that.
I think it was the book, the autobiography of Malcolm X, and that had a profound effect on me politically. I read that book when I was Form 2 in MCKK, and that book basically is how this Malcolm X, the moment he converted to Islam, he from a ideological position of black supremacy to fight for his people, he then saw that a universal justice for everyone as being the solution. And it just struck me that here we have a country of where more than half of the people are Muslims, but the religion is always used to divide or to talk about the so-called superiority of a race over others, which if you read the Quran is totally opposite of what we were taught. And it just struck me that why weren't enough politicians talking about that, and obviously through my father, yes, I read stuff about Tun Razak and all that, but I also read things about Dr. Burhanuddin, Ahmad Bostaman, all the stuff, and it just gave me sort of a very rounded view. So and I met friends obviously in MCKK. When I recall back when I was in primary school, yes, a lot of my rich friends were Chinese, but they were poor Chinese friends from the squatter areas. There were at that time, and they were rich Malay kids and so on and so forth. But this goes, the counter Malay dilemma argument, where I do not believe that just because I'm Malay, I'm naturally weak. My father struggled because he came from a family that was in the kampong that did not get the same access to education, to business like probably people in the cities, right? But it's not because he's Malay. It's not intrinsically racial. So I think that was something that I could not accept in the argument. And I had, when I met friends in my A levels college in Lembah Beringin, College Yayasan UAM, one of the first articles I wrote and which generated a lot of controversy, I said that there was an informal apartheid because the Malays will sit in the Malay table and the non-Malay in the non-Malay table, right? Because no one asked them to do that. It's just that it's out of comfort, out of habit. And so I wanted to confront that. And I think that's the only way out for Malaysia.
PKR has been around for some time. It has done very well in Klang Valley, has done well in Penang. It is still seen as an urban-based party, enjoying support from the Malays, the urban Malays. It has been trying very hard to break into the rural areas. It has not done well in Sabah and Sarawak. What are the obstacles in terms of PKR convincing Malays there is more than just demi bangsa, agama dan negara? What are the obstacles that the PKR has faced?
I think one of the things was, and I support that decision entirely. When I started working, or just before I started working for Anwar, he came out strongly against the new economic policy. And I remember because I have always believed in that, as I explained. And here I was working for, just as I was being active in the party, and Anwar was stating these things. And I remember that a lot of his, not just the Malay friends, but even some non-Malay friends, even funders, they were saying that this may not be the right way to go. It is the right way to go. And we gained, because in 99, during Reformasi, we did not get the non-Malay votes. We made huge gains in 2008. Partly because of that, partly because of UMNO's misgivings, UMNO's mistakes, sorry. But on the other hand, it did cost us some support among the Malays. I think the urban Malays, they have sort of, they have gotten used to PH or Pakatan Rakyat and PH, where keadilan is part of it. They know that, the world doesn't collapse when the AP becomes part of government. Whereas, even though we've been holding some minor positions in Kelantan during when we were together with PAS, it's always been very, very much PAS dominated. And we haven't been able to convince them, and there's still a big prejudice against the AP, which has been planted so strongly for so many years. And I think but we have to fight that battle. And, we thought that in 2018 that the shortcut was to work with a pseudo or a semi-UMNO party known as PPBM or Bersatu at that time. It worked as a tactic, but strategically it cost us the government after 22 months because it was, a marriage of convenience in many ways. So the next challenge is to go to the Malay heartlands. And now the party, for whatever reason, has given me the responsibility of leading the Kelantan and Terengganu chapters. We have to go there without having this to subcontract it to so-called Malay party like PPBM or Pejuang or whatever. We have to take the lead and convince them. I think it's possible, but it's a lot of hard work. It means going down there and listening to them. And there are things that we need to reflect on how we approach policy or how we communicate policy in order to win them over. Just a short one is the mistakes we had with ICERT and the Rome Statute. I think that's a good example. I'm all for those two legislations. And you know that, even countries like Saudi Arabia and all that, they've all signed those treaties. Unfortunately, when we did it, it was just announced just like that. There was no engagement, as opposed to the campaigners for the UN Convention Against Torture, where they met even with PAS, even with Persatuan
Sure.
Ulama, even with ISMA, the most right-wing organizations, to convince them on the merits of that treaty. That wasn't done, and I think that's the problem. That we think that just because we were ruling,
Yeah.
we can push that so-called liberal agenda, and people can accept it.
You come from a family, big family links in Kelantan. Now, as a non-Muslim, and I think I can speak quite freely on behalf of many non-Malays. We have always been curious as to why PAS continue to enjoy the support in the East Coast, although he has done a pretty bad job in running the state, and he has not introduced anything that can uplift the state, but it has been there for many terms. Why is it so rooted in the East Coast? Why does it enjoy so much support in Kelantan particularly?
Yeah, you're correct. It's particularly a Kelantanese thing. PAS has won Terengganu, but it has been always very short stints. 3 times they've won Terengganu, not once more than one term. So whereas in Kelantan, the last time they won it from UMNO was 1990. So it's almost like, UMNO winning Kelantan is almost like Liverpool winning the league, right? So one of the things is obviously, that the idea of Islamic values or social conservatism is obviously dominant in Kelantan. But it's also driven, previously, it was by the charisma of Tok Guru Nik Aziz.
Yes.
Because people saw that he practiced what he preached. And that's not something easy to find, even among religious people. I mean, that's just the way things work. He was almost like a real life Gandhi, but even Gandhi did not actually hold executive power. So that was how powerful he was. But since he is passing, you can see that aura has sort of slowly disappeared. It will be, I wouldn't say, PH will win Kelantan, but it's going to be a tough election for PAS in Kelantan and Terengganu. The only thing that is to PAS favor in Kelantan is that I think the people in Kelantan, unlike in Terengganu, are very reluctant to give it to UMNO. In the 60s even, they said that, a person may not be Islamic at all, but there's that sense, if you're Kelantanese, you vote for PAS. So I think that is where they have an advantage. But ultimately, it goes down to bread and butter, and they are doing, as you correctly said, they are doing especially badly. Last time, I think they had the benefit of people like Husam and Taqiyuddin to assist Tok Guru, which sort of balanced things a bit, but they don't have that now.
How does the East Coast Malay voters feel about PAS being so reluctant to speak up against corruption? It's almost zero when it comes to corruption. Sometimes the what do you call it, the Hadi is even an apologist when it comes to corruption. How do they feel about it?
I think they're angry. I mean, when I speak to the people in Grab and all that, when I go down to Kota Baru, and we were wearing masks, so I don't think he knew who I was, but they were talking about all the YBs being Putrajaya lobbying for projects. The water is so dirty. They can feel it, but we have to make it about things that relate to them. I mean, the LCS is all well and good. It works well in my constituency. But maybe for them, we have to reflect about how Kelantan water is being managed, the road projects there, so on and so forth. So they are. I mean, they do care about corruption. I think it's people, when people say that rural Malays don't care about corruption, it's totally wrong. But I think the communication, articulation of it hasn't been made in a way that can relate to them.
Now, coming back to the PH government for 22 months, you're part of the government. What were the lessons that you have learned, the success and the missteps, both of them?
Never to believe in Mahathir again. But I think the main lessons was that power changes people. And I say this, perhaps I've been fortunate in the sense that I wasn't chosen to be part of the cabinet. Because the moment you start to be a minister, you have an outrider, you have your bodyguard, people come, people will stand up whenever you walk into a room. It does things to you, right? And I can feel that. I mean, I don't blame. I mean, it's a natural human thing, and maybe I would be worse off if I was part of it. Um, that was one of the reasons why it was so difficult for us to move on after the Sheraton move. Because for a lot of people it was just difficult, and I'm talking about the people who stayed on in PH. Um, I think we just have to remember our values. I was speaking to a former and current Barisan National Minister, and he was saying, things like the peruntukan, like going to school, for every MP. Why didn't we walk the talk when we were in power? And I did even speak up in Parliament, about the crossing over UMNO to Bersatu, about us getting into schools, about equal allocation. But then, they start to give excuses like, oh, UMNO has so much money, this is just, they start to, I kept reminding them that we won't be in power forever. And true enough, it was just 22 months, right? And then suddenly, well, we managed to make it work. And fortunately enough, because of the political situation, through the MOU. But it would have been better if we had the moral high ground. So I think that's an important thing. It's so easy to misplace our values when we are in power. It's so easy to talk about values when you're without power. And I hope, a reminder to myself as well, that we can walk the talk, and when we get back to power, to do these reforms and to really push them for the benefit of the country.
Did you feel that at some point, some of the cabinet ministers in the PH government did not know how to handle the Malay-dominated civil service? They have been there, and as they say, the politicians come and go, but the civil service will always be there. There was this, I heard these grumblings of the lack of respect towards some of the senior government servants, and there were complaints and grumblings that sometimes they were ignored, and that some of the ministers brought in their own team and put aside some of the government servants. Did you feel that some of these were the things that led to a lot of resentment from the civil service?
Yes, I mean, it's probably a few cases, but that's all what it takes to paint the entire government in that way. And because there are many reservations, particularly about DAP, so it's easy to fall into that trap. And I mean, I would say majority of DAP ministers did very well. And they probably, in terms of capability, no questions about that. In terms even of engaging the civil servants, most of them struck it well. But just a few bad apples, then it makes it problematic. And I think it took me by surprise, because some of them actually came from government. It's not that they've never been in government before. They've worked with civil servants before, and civil servants. I mean, we just have to watch Yes Minister and see the how difficult it is to work the system when you come from outside, but especially when you come from a different party. I mean, that was the first change at the federal level. So I think that did have lasting damage in many ways. But I mean, I think some of the newer, younger leaders in the AP, the way they handle things are different and better, and I think that's positive for PH.
Now, let's talk about the GE15. Okay, now it's going to be a very crowded field. There are so many political parties. Not only do you have to handle PKR, not only do you have to handle your traditional opponents, like Barisan Nasional, but suddenly you have Warisan coming into the picture. Warisan is giving the PKR and bashing PKR, bashing DAP. Although it's another political opposition party. How do you feel about this crowded field that's shaping up?
Yeah, I mean, there's what do you call that? It does make things more interesting. But I think the big battles will be fought between BN, Perikatan, and PH. But obviously, I mean, if you look at Sabah, Warisan is strong. I know Warisan has a national strategy, but realistically, I think that the focus will be in Sabah. I don't, GPS is obviously very dominant in Sarawak, no questions. But otherwise, there are a lot of parties, but I don't see them making much of a dent beyond maybe a few seats.
Now, I want to talk about Muda, which has got the attention among many young Malaysians. Okay, Syed Siddiq has won a lot of points. Okay, a lot of brownie points, and a lot of excitement about him and his party. I understand that from the statements made by PKR, there seems to be a lot of reservations about PKR going to be a component of the Pakatan Harapan. What's your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, I've said publicly before that in terms of ideology, makeup, demography, Muda is much more similar to Keadilan or DAP compared to Pejuang, right? So in that sense, it's very much similar, and I mean, definitely they do have a strong appeal among youth in certain areas, strong social media footing, but then again, it's about translating it into votes. Um, the major issue for us, I think, is about joining a coalition. If you're talking about some form of political cooperation, I think it's easier to accept for many people in Keadilan. But if you're talking about a formal coalition, there's still some lasting damage from the experience of Johor and some of the statements that have been made by Muda before. So I've been tasked to handle the negotiations with Muda for the PH team representing Keadilan. So I've frankly communicated these things when we met. Obviously, Sadiq had his reply and all that. We will pass it to the Presidential Council, whether we discuss it further and so on and so forth. But I think it's a waste not to find some form of cooperation.
Yeah.
But again, just not joining the coalition is not necessarily the worst thing for Muda or PH. I think that the other part that we have to be concerned about is ultimately, where's our weakness? Our weakness are the Malay seats, or maybe many areas in Borneo, the Malay seats in the East Coast. So does Muda bring us an added value there? But if Muda's attraction is in Lembah Pantai, in Setiawangsa, in all these KL seats or PJ seats, then it becomes a problem for our base as well. Because ultimately we want to find partners who can bring the value in the blue ocean for us. So I think that's the other big questions that Muda has to answer.
It seems they have been given very difficult tasks, getting PKR into the East Coast and working out a deal with Muda.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, one final question before we wrap it up. How has your preparations been personally for you for the GE15?
Well, it's been quite hectic. I think we started for us in Keadilan with the party elections early this year. And then after the results, and then we're given new assignments to handle. And then obviously taking care of the constituency. For me, it's Setiawangsa, and Setiawangsa, UMNO has only lost it in 2018. So it's definitely not an easy seat. I think people have seen what I've done over the last 5 years. People I still think that I'm in a good position going into the election if I'm being asked to stand in Setiawangsa. But definitely I have to work to earn that support. So I don't take things for granted. Definitely no new books coming up soon, next few years. But I think it's really about pushing, I think, it's about how do we solve the issues of the lost generation, and trying to put that as the main thrust of my campaign, because we have school kids, we have workers, we have graduates who were affected by COVID, and or even businessmen, and for them recovery still seems very, very far away. It's just like barely surviving right now. So I think that's the big question that any political party has to answer when they go into the 15 GE.
Now, YB, we love to see big fights, okay? We love this excitement for G15. So Anwar Ibrahim has spoken about the possibility of fielding the big guns against this so-called traitors who have run off to Bersatu. Okay, now, personally, would you want to see Anwar Ibrahim contesting against Asmin Ali, for example, or some of the bigger guys fighting against other opponents in the other constituencies? What's your take on these big fights?
I mean, I agree that we have to put strong candidates in the pengkhianat areas. In short, yesterday I was speaking in Bandar Tun Razak, and Bandar Tun Razak is especially painful because Tan Sri Khalid left the party, Allahyarham Tan Sri Khalid, and then now we have Datuk KJ who also left the party. So they've been loyal. The voters have been loyal to keadilan. Unfortunately, the MPs that they voted have not been loyal to the party. So I think we need to put what I say are grade A candidates, whether it's Anwar Ibrahim or Rafizi has declared that he's going for Pandan. But surely we need good candidates, and I think capability is one, but I think people want to see loyalty, because people really value that loyalty. I mean, there is an anti-hopping law, but it still means that you can still defect. It's just subject to a by-election. So I think people are still very much concerned about that if they want to turn out to vote in the next election.
Karim Jafar, the other KJ, was my lecturer in UKM. He taught me political science.
Yes.
Now, okay, our final message to viewers watching this tonight. What's your call to them ahead of the GE15?
Well, before the GE15, please buy my book, Malaysian Sun. It's available on all major bookstores. But I think this election, I mean, I can understand the hurt, the pain, the disillusionment that many people went through after the Sheraton move. But I think we are going through a process of renewal in the opposition. We see, Anwar Ibrahim, Guan Eng is still around, but we also see people like Anthony Loh, Rafizi, Nurul Izzah making a comeback. And I think we need to really go into the election and push for a win. If you asked me 5 months ago whether PH can win the elections, I would say very, very difficult, and that's being diplomatic, right? But this time, this moment, and I think that's a reason why UMNO's pushing for a quick election. I think our fortunes are improving, and theirs are dipping. So that we might win if it's at the right point of time. So, but we need the support, and it's for us, just as we saw in Johor, just as we saw in Malacca. It's about turnout. If we can get the turnout, then I think that will be the key clincher for us to win. And what all I ask is give us 5 years. And I know the 22 months wasn't their fault, because that were the politicians' fault. But now with the anti-hopping law and all that, I think we are in a better place to have a stable government. And then after that, feel free to vote us in or out depending on how we perform.
Thank you for YB for spending time with us. I'm going to make a pitch again. I'm going to ask for 10%, okay, for the sale of this book.
Thank you, Ratosri.
Do you read this book? It's really good. As you can see, I actually made notes out of it, okay? And thank you for joining us tonight. Please stay with us. We will have more of these discussions, more of this discourse, opening up the minds of Malaysians and maturing the democratic process. That, as in all politics, the reasons why we have election is that because we want to hear more views, differing views for this country, differing views, but we all have one thing in common. We love Malaysia, and we want to have better things for Malaysia. Thank you. Good night, YB. Stay cool.
Good
In
night.
touch.
Thank
Bye.
you.